Hi, my name is Tim. Join me in this video as we give you an update on remote ID and why there are no FRIAs, the FAA Recognized Identification Area, is approved yet, this being filmed in first week of June 2023. Why are there no FRIAs? Let's get to it. As an overview for this video, is being filmed on June 3rd, 2023. Remote ID is a new program being implemented by the FAA for RC model and drone operators, where you have to have a capability identifying the drone flying in the national airspace system, drone location, altitude, flight path, and where the drone took off. There's a lot of controversy in the remote ID. The rule has been finalized by the FAA per congressional delegation. Nobody has to comply with the remote ID until September 16th, 2023. Again, nobody has to comply with the remote ID, but there are three phases of the remote ID from the manufacturers, modules, and airspace over your local club field that have to be in compliance with the remote ID. I will discuss real quickly what's happening with manufacturers and remote IDs, but what I want to focus on later on in this video is a concept of FRIAs, or the FAA Recognized Identification Area. That deal is part of the remote ID regulation, where you can fly at your local AMA club, certain educational facilities, contests and so forth without any need for remote IDs at all. To date, there has been 0 FRIAs approved. The compliance date is coming up pretty quickly with September 16th. And in this video, I will tell you the answer why we have no FRIAs approved yet as of the first week of June 2023. Again, thank you as always for watching the video. I greatly appreciate any likes and subscribes. It hugely helps the channel, and thank you for your cooperation and help in that area. So drones and unmanned small aircraft systems are a huge part of what the FAA does these days. Was amazed when I went on the FAA.gov website today, the splash page, the page you enter. Of the 5 latest news items on that splash page, 4 out of 5 regarded drones or small unmanned aircraft systems. 4 out of 5. I find this astonishing. This is the FAA that's certifying 787 aircraft, working with SpaceX to go into outer space, doing all the stuff that they do on a daily basis. 80% of their latest news is with drones. So I'll put it up here on the side, the latest news. The first thing out of 5 is $100 million to reduce runway incursions at airports. That's a good thing. Next, mark your calendar, 2023 FAA Drone Symposium, Advanced Air Mobility Summit. Next, FAA Stakeholders Meeting, UAS Detection, Mitigation, Aviation Rulemaking Committees. Blueprint for air taxis, which is a form of drones. And then finally, FAA seeks public input on drone operations. That's amazing. So the takeaway from all that, drones are here. They're here to stay. They're not going away. It's going to be a future industry, I'm sure, in the United States as more and more people see the advantage of drones. Remote ID is a foundational aspect of this. It's a stepping stone to more things going on. So we just have to get used to the fact that remote ID is here. There will be, I'm sure, variations on how it is implemented and adapted, but that's just for your background information. Another thing I find a little bit interesting is there was originally a lot of discussion when quadcopters first came out over drones and RC model aircraft. The FAA lumped them all together with UAS, unmanned aircraft systems, small. Just the way the FAA looked at it, the vehicle operating in the air under control, and as an aside, that's why baseballs and things like that don't count in the national airspace system. So it's a small aircraft under the control of some operator somewhere, but there's no person inside. And from the FAA's viewpoint, whether or not there's a human inside that aircraft makes a huge difference in how they regulate it, what it's expected to do, because of the see and avoid policy with the FAA. So to recap with remote ID, the remote ID is kind of the digital license plate in the sky. It's mandated by an FAA regulation. The FAA is in the process, this is June of 2023, of implementing remote ID. Remote ID becomes effective for everybody in September 16th, 2023. In this video, I'm going to focus on recreational users, people that fly RC models or drones just for fun. It's a little bit more detailed requirements for remote ID for Part 107 commercial operators. The Part 107 people, you know who you are, you're more tied into the regulations, but this is for the recreational pilots, so everybody has to follow these. In short, after September 16th, we have to comply with the remote ID. The first part of that is the manufacturers of the remote ID. On September 16th, 2023, all drones sold have to be in compliance with FAA Remote ID requirements. To do that, just as an aside, there are two things manufacturers have to do. There is a means of compliance, and then there's a declaration of compliance. The means of compliance, I'll show the document here. It's an extremely complex proposal to the FAA of how a manufacturer is going to comply with the remote ID. Once this is approved or accepted in the terms of the FAA, the manufacturers can use that to build the remote ID capability. Once they do that, the manufacturers will submit that to the FAA. They have to get what's called an accepted declaration of compliance from the FAA that what they are doing will comply with the means of compliance for the remote ID. In other words, it's street legal. And right now on the FAA website, when you look at declaration of compliance, there's about 105 manufacturers. That's the manufacturer and the drone model that are acceptable to the FAA to comply with the remote ID. So just as an observer of the scene with the manufacturers, they know remote ID is a must-do. They've been doing a lot of work on it. There's 105 versions of drones and manufacturers that are completely acceptable for the remote ID with the FAA. So I think the manufacturers are going to be in pretty good shape for the September 16th date, and there will be a little tag showing that it is compliant on any drones that you buy with the remote ID in it. Now the other one that's a little bit vague is the remote ID module. This is if you build your own model, you have an older drone, you have to have a module that has a remote ID compliance module in it. It's just some electronics that somehow will plug into our system and will make us remote ID compliant. There's about 6 remote ID modules out there that are acceptable to the FAA and for sale. The problem is they're not cheap. They're anywhere from $200 to $300. That's, in my view, just my opinion, a non-starter for the hobbyist, recreational RC model pilot or drone operator. But what I'm kind of sensing is if there are 105 acceptable means of drones right now, there must be some way to take that capability, make a more affordable module. The FAA has taken that approach. It's a wait and see approach. We'll have to see if that happens. If it does not happen, that there's an affordable remote ID module by the September 16th date, we'll have to see what the FAA does. My guess, this is just a guess as an outside observer, the FAA will slip that compliance date, but we don't know that at this time. Again, nothing to worry about today in June of 2023, because we don't have to be compliant to June 16th, but more for your background information on the remote ID module. Let's talk now about the FRIAs, or the FAA Recognized Identification Area. The FRIAs are always an intriguing concept to me. I think it's a very good idea because it allows a large number of RC modelers, RC pilots, helicopter pilots, drone operators to fly without any electronics or hardware whatsoever to be compliant with a remote ID ruling. And what the concept is between a FRIA, there'll be an airspace at your local AMA club or other community-based organization. The FAA defines what a community-based organization is. They can apply, the community-based organization applies to the FAA, says where, for the AMA in this case, where the clubs are located, the altitudes, just the space on the map where the club is. And when that is acceptable to the FAA is going to give that club a 4-year FRIA authorization, which means anybody operating in that club's airspace does not have to have any hardware. They are remote ID compliant because they're in the FRIA airspace. FRIA airspace will be to AMA, was the first community-based organization in November of 2022, and the AMA started the application, the actual policy with the FAA. Other colleges and educational universities could come in. There's good indications that certain contests, sanctioned contests, will have a FRIA, a temporary FRIA associated with them. So the FRIA is a very interesting and to me an exciting concept that can allow modelers to be compliant with remote ID without having to spend any money. I fully understand from the comments that there are many modelers that are a distance away from an AMA club that cannot access that. I get that. But for now, for those people that are in an AMA club, it's going to be a very good solution. The problem is the AMA started their FRIA, well, they were a community-based organization in November of 2022, started work with the FAA. Here we are about 8 months later. There are no FRIAs approved at all anywhere in the US. And why is that? So I did some research and I have the answer. What happens, and I'm going to check to my notes every now and then because I have to, this is kind of a foreign language. So the FAA, when they do things, there's a bunch of other federal regulations they have to comply with. One of those regulations is NEPA, N-E-P-A. NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. This is a 1970 act or law by Congress that says any federal agency that does anything that has a proposed impact on the environment has to do a National Environmental Policy Act. This is something that just has to be done before that act can be implemented. It turns out that the FRIAs fall under the requirement to do a National Environmental Policy Act evaluation. Okay, that's just what has to happen. So what had happened was the first thing the FAA had to do was publish a programmatic environmental assessment. That was part of this process in the Federal Register, and that process of the programmatic environmental assessment that ended on May 3rd. What happened after May 3rd, the FAA will have to wait 60 days from that date to wait for comments and input before they can officially approve any site as a FRIA. So what that means is we're in that 60-day waiting period mandated by the regulation. So it's going to be July 2nd, 2023 at the earliest before any FRIAs can be approved. So that is where we are with the FRIAs. Why there have been no FRIAs approved to date is part of the federal process for the environmental impact that the FAA is mandated to follow to do something like this. So my guess is in July you'll probably see a lot of FRIAs being approved. I am sure that the FAA is reviewing the paperwork and getting ahead of that, so when they are legally allowed to do that, they will approve the FRIA. So we'll wait for July to get an update on that. The only other thing I want to mention on this, and I get a lot of comments on this, some people are pretty angry about the whole idea of remote ID, and I will just say as a pilot flying full-scale aircraft to include commercial airliners for the past 50 years, just FAA regulations are just a way of life operating in the national airspace system, especially with things getting as busy as they are. And as we mentioned, the drones, 4 out of 5 of the news items are drone. There's no human inside the cockpit for these. But I did take another look at the UAS sightings report on the FAA database. This is where pilots of full-scale aircraft, if they see a drone in restricted airspace, this is always Group B, C, or D airspace. If they see a drone in that airspace, they report it. Now, maybe a few of those drones have a pre-clearance from the FAA. I don't know. But, and I'll show you the page right here. In the first week of October 22, the first 7 days of October 22, there were 33 sightings of drones. And you can see in the report it says quadcopters in Class B, C, or D airspace. This is everything from Cessna 172s to business jets to an Airbus 380 flying from London into Washington Dulles. We, as a drone RC pilot community, we've got to quit flying into controlled airspace without a clearance. These types of sightings, the FAA is just going to be forced to take action with remote ID. So I'll stop there, but we just can't fly in controlled airspace without a clearance. It is not in our interest as a modeling community to do something like that. So again, thank you for watching the video. I appreciate you looking at the channel, and as we get more updates on the remote ID, especially the FRIA process, I'll be sure to provide an update. Thank you.